Hello and a very warm welcome to Engineered Unicorns, fantastic books for a magical lifestyle. My name is SandyJ and you are listening to Campusradio Karlsruhe. At the start of the show we have the Bookish update, followed by my book recommendations for you. And at the end, I'm going to tell you about some releases in August that are interesting. Now, let's start with the Bookish update for this month. In July, I get back into audiobooks. I finished so far 4 audiobooks, and I'm currently reading 2 very old books as audiobooks. And weirdly enough, even though one is more than double the length of the other one, they feel like they are the same length. It's really strange. And what I'm currently reading, just so you know, is The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell, which is a non-fiction book. And then there's Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens, which is fiction and is an absolute classic. The Hero with 1,000 Faces, the Joseph Campbell book, is non-fiction in that regard that it's comparing myths from around the world and looks into them from a psychoanalysis perspective, and it was written in 1948, so Joseph Campbell draws heavily on the writings from Sigmund Freud, and they have a very weird view of women, I think. But the audiobook is good, and the audiobook by Marisa Kalin, who is the narrator for Our Mutual Friend, is really interesting. So the story is written by Charles Dickens. It's a very long book. It's about 800 pages. So the audiobook is 35 hours long and it's really good. She's a exceptional narrator. There are some chapters that I skip because the book is so long and because I don't like the characters and the plot line for those chapters. Charles Dickens makes it really easy to skip those chapters because most of the time he follows a plot line in one chapter. He doesn't switch plot lines in the chapters. And so it's easy to skip those chapters that I don't like. Both are very interesting audiobooks and books in itself. And while Charles Dickens is available at the American Library, The Hero of 1,000 Faces is currently not available at the Karlsruhe Library System. I also started using the Storygraph app in July, and as you may know, I usually give the details of the books that I recommend to you via a link to Goodreads, and the Storygraph app is partly a bit like Goodreads, so that you can log your books that you read and you want to read. However, the Storygraph brings in something special. So you can, with that, look at how your reading is. So Goodreads doesn't give you graphics about what kind of books you prefer, but Storygraph does. So you have diagrams about your favorite books. For instance, I like books that are lighthearted and adventurous, which wasn't that surprising to me. What I found surprising was that I don't lean heavily towards fast-paced books, and as a matter of fact, in my case, it's comparatively evenly distributed between fast, medium, and slow-paced books. But the main chunk is still medium-paced books, which was surprising to me. And what I also really like about the Storygraph app is that you get very easily trigger warnings, because this is something that is really annoying with Goodreads. You don't have a box where you have trigger warnings, and Storygraph has that. So you are warned ahead what it will contain in this book, which is quite nice. For instance, I read Haruki Murakami's Kafka on the Shore. There were some situations in this book which were really harrowing, and I would have liked to be warned ahead. The Storygraph app has trigger warnings, which are provided by the readers and sometimes even by the authors. Naturally, it's only provided by the authors if they think about it and if they are alive. So to do that, in Goodreads, you need to find, and actually you need to read a lot of those comments about the book to maybe happen upon this trigger warning. And when you go to Storygraph, concerning every book, there are trigger warnings, if there are any. And so I quite like this about this app. In July, I finally was able to go back to coffee shops and do my planning there. I really missed this, and it wasn't available until around the middle of June. And so I finally went back there and started planning again. And it's not a straight line, unfortunately. Just first I thought, oh yeah, I can go today and then I will have everything planned out. No, it doesn't work like that. It's not a straight line. So it took me several times to go to the coffee shop to get back into planning. And this was really helpful and I quite enjoyed it. I drank very good coffee and I made progress. And for instance, I planned out a project which is sorting out my stuff, my wardrobe and my books. And with that, we are at the next point because I brought my books to one of the free book cabinets around Karlsruhe. I will provide a link to the list of those in the city wiki. And there are quite a lot in Karlsruhe, and you can go there and just look at the books that they have and just can pick up a book if you like it. Over the years, I found two interesting books. One I found in Dorlach and one I found in the zoo, because in the zoo there is, in the city garden part, there is also a book cabinet, and I found a nice fantasy book there. So over the years, I found two books there. However, it's a good place to get my books that I no longer want to other readers for free. And I sorted out a few books a few weeks back and brought them to the Hochschule für Musik, the music university at Schloss Gottesauer. And there I put in that cabinet, I put some of my books. And last week I checked back because I was out with friends and the books were gone. So someone liked them enough to pick them up. I'm glad about it. And as you know, I quite like YouTube, and there is a really, really nice video by Morgan Long. She's the creator who lives in Portland in the United States. And she has a video which is called City of Books. And she goes around to the little free libraries, which are essentially book cabinets, but not the big ones as we have in Karlsruhe, but small ones, which are put up by people and on their gardens, and where you can put one book in and get one book out if you like so. So they made a trip around the city, and I quite enjoyed this video, so I will link it. Another video I found that was really interesting is called Why is Grimdark?, which is a video about grimdark fantasy, and it's by the A Critical Dragon YouTube channel. In this video, they discuss grimdark fantasy, and as they are both academics who teach this stuff, fantasy, the discussion is quite interesting and very, very long. It's over an hour, this video, and God, I wish I could discuss books on that level because it's really interesting. So I will link that video too. I will give you the recommendation for two audiobooks that I've read this past month. The non-fiction recommendation is by B.J. Fogg, and it's called Tiny Habits, which was released in 2019. The fictional recommendation I have for you is The Left-Handed Booksellers of London, which was released last year and is by Garth Nix, a you listen to older episodes of this podcast, you might have heard about this book because it was one of my releases that I hinted at. Let's start with the nonfiction recommendation, B.J. Fogg Tiny Habits. B.J. Fogg is actually a researcher at Stanford University, and he's specializing in behavior and especially in habits. That's his field of expertise and where he researches. So you can actually look up his laboratory at Stanford. And he wrote this book because he wanted to help people to form their habits and to improve their life. The audiobook is narrated by him, and so this audiobook has an added chapter which isn't included in the print edition because B.J. Fogg, when he was little, he had a speech impediment, and therefore he had to train really hard to be able to narrate this audiobook. So he talks extensively about his own experiences with habit creation and how this works. And he gives a lot of examples from the people he worked with over the years, because he did that more than 20 years at the point when he wrote this book. And it's really interesting how habits are formed. And the researcher, B.J. Fogg, this makes it special because he knows how he was doing the experiments, not only on people, but also on himself. So he knows the in and outs of habit formation, and also with rewarding yourself to create a new habit. For instance, if you want to create the habit of exercising, you need to have the reward right in the exercise or right at the end of it. To say, I will do exercise every day and then I will reward myself with massage after 2 weeks or something like this. It's an actual example from him. This massage is an incentive. It's not a reward, because it's for your brain to link the massage with every exercise. This doesn't work. So you need to celebrate every little thing that you did. And this is one of the big things, in my opinion, in this book, that you learn to celebrate your little steps ahead. And I'm trying to incorporate this in my life. It's not as easy as it sounds. And it's also a bit weird to celebrate that you just put the trash out or something like this. But celebration can be with just, oh yeah, you did good, and you can like this. So celebration doesn't need to be a big to-do, but just a clap on the shoulder if that works for you, or yeah, or something like this. So that's a big thing. And I really like the audiobook narrated by him. He does it very well. His voice I quite like it. I've heard a lot of audiobooks now, and there are some that are really horrible, but not this one, definitely not. He does a very good job, and I quite enjoyed it. And it's really interesting. I listened to several of his chapters again already, because I want to really use that information. And the audiobook also comes with a PDF file, so to show you the graphs and stuff like this. Yeah, he is a researcher, so obviously he has graphs. So I quite liked it, and I highly recommend it. It's currently not available at the Karlsruhe Library System. I think it's definitely worth to read, and I really enjoyed the audiobook, so I highly recommend the audiobook for you. And that was B.J. Fogg, Tiny Habits, and was released in 2019. So it's up to date with the research. My fictional and fantasy recommendation for you is The Left-Handed Booksellers of London by Garth Nix. It was released the last year in the autumn. And I also listened to the audiobook. It's currently not available at the Karlsruhe Library System, but eventually they might have it. I listened to the audiobook. It was read by Marisa Kalin, and it's a fast-paced book, and it plays in a alternate London in 1983 or something like that. And so it's quite fun to kind of find back your way into the time where there were no cell phones and stuff like this. And interestingly enough, it's not an issue with this story. As a matter of fact, it lends itself to the story quite well, because they have to stop and use a payphone to call in and stuff like that. So it's quite fun. The storyline follows a girl, Susan, and she is just turned 18, and she goes to London to find her father. And when she visits the friend of her mother, she meets a guy, who's Merlin, and trouble ensues. And so she gets to know the left-handed and right-handed booksellers of London. And this is a secret, where you could say association. I think that's the right word. It's kind of a family, but not really. And they not only sell books, but they keep the other world in check. So the fairies and old sovereigns and magic and stuff like this. And so they move between these worlds. There are goblins and part of the story, and there's magic in it. There are hounds in the story and cauldrons. So I quite enjoyed it. It's a really fast-paced book. I read it in 2 days flat, so I really enjoyed it. It probably helped that I also was playing Animal Crossing while I listened to it. It's such a good book. It's so fast-paced. The characters are, well, not that diverse, but Garth Nix did some work to have a more diverse and more interesting set of characters. I quite like that. That, for instance, Merlin, he's androgynous and he loves fashion, so it's quite interesting, and he's an interesting character, and I really liked him. And I also liked Susan, who is the main character, and the sister of Merlin, Vivian, is also quite nice. I hope Garth Nix does write more in this world. It's, as I've said before, it's a really enjoyable book. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's definitely a 5-star read for me, as was also B.J. Fogg's Tiny Habits. So 2 very, very good audiobooks in my opinion. So B.J. Fogg, Tiny Habits from 2019, and Garth Nix, The Left-Handed Booksellers of London 2020. We are almost at the end of this episode. There are naturally book releases in August, and I found actually more interesting book releases in this month than in July. So first there's Jordan E. Frecko with Redemptor, which will be released on August 17th, and Nick's own Fast Pitch, which will be released on August 31st. Those 2 are Black Offers. Then there's Sasha Payton Smith with The Witch Haven, which will also be released on 31st of August. And last but not least, Helen Ho-Wang with The Heart Principle, which will also release on August 31st. So this is actually it for this episode. I hope you can enjoy August. This is it for Engineered Unicorns. You are listening to Campusradio Karlsruhe. My name is SandyJ. You will find all the information in the show notes, on the website, and naturally on the podcasting platform.